consume knowledge. Right. All right. So the online world has, at least the human behavior has changed in a direction wherein technology has crept into our lives. So more and more of the knowledge that we get, the entertainment that we get, information that we get, the ideologies that we follow are more or less intertwined with technology. Uh, we believe in technology, and we look at technology as a source for information, validation, or let's say knowledge. So that's how it is. Now, when you think of your profession, right? Some of you might become a brand manager. Some of you might become a marketing manager. Some of you might become a trade promotion manager, and so on. So there are multiple fields within this. But more and more of your value to the organization is now becoming measurable, which means that uh, if you uh, if you do not add sufficient value, you're going to be made redundant. The uh, key uh, the key reason I'm telling you that is, let's take technology as an industry, right? We have organizations such as Infosys, TCS, and all. Historically, labor cost has increased a lot, but then the profit margins has also increased, which means the labor productivity has increased. And the which means that cost components of any organization will be reduced, and productivity, the dollar revenue that is earned per employee, will be increasing over a period of time. That's an organizational objective. Marketing is a cost center. In most organizations, marketing is a cost center. So every dollar that they spend, that an organization spends into the marketing team itself, not just the marketing channel investment, will now be scrutinized. And I'll tell you a couple of ways in which there are advancements. So when you think of psychology plus creativity, right? You think of ads that are more guerrilla based in nature. So if you think about your cred ad, where Rahul Dravid is a gunda, there's an anger tantrum. So these are guerrilla tactics. And because of the nature of the advertisement, it's also very apparent. It's very easy to measure as well, right? You spent X amount of dollars. What is the short-term impact? And slowly you'll also be able to measure the long-term impact, which we couldn't do earlier. So, just spending money in terms of advertising is no longer the norm. Now, on top of it, if you look at the nature in which we spend our money, right? Earlier, newspaper advertisement had a budget. You distributed newspaper advertisements into XYZ amounts. You distributed some amount into TV advertisement across channels and all. Now, even the marketing investments are becoming programmatic in nature. So what do I mean by programmatic? So if you have looked at Google Ads or any ad that you see in any dynamic platform such as YouTube or Facebook or Google AdWords and so on, over there, the way you spend your dollars is programmatic in nature. There is a bidding process that goes through, and most of the bidding process is based on time of the day, the regional cut that you have, and the dollar bid that you have for that particular slot. So it is a slot based dynamic pricing model. So you have to be up to the date to even understand how much do I need to spend in each of the channels. So display ads, video ads, social ads, audio ads, native ads, DOOH, all of these have a programmatic bidding process. So you can Google it if you're not very sure about what is programmatic marketing. So uh, that is the nature of investment. The second part, so the programmatic is how do you invest, right? Where do you invest is the second question. So the nature of the online world as well as offline, I'm not demeaning offline world as well or offline advertisements. The nature of online is a little more dynamic in nature. So the platforms that people utilize to interact also change over a period of time. So during Corona, right, some of the prominent platforms were House Party as one of the prominent platforms where advertisement money went through. So Facebook and Twitter, these are no longer the prominent social media channels. There are so many other alternatives that are crop up. So there are multiple platforms for different conversational types that are coming in, and there are multiple channels. So when you bid for an ad spot, right, you bid for an ad spot for a web as a channel as well as mobile as a channel. So now you need to make decisions with respect to mobile channels, web channels, which platform, which time of the day, which geographic area, as well as the demographic that you're going to target. And every different platform has a purpose associated, right? You go to Quora.com when you need answers to specific questions. You go to Amazon.com when you want to identify or purchase a particular product in a particular category. When you're clear about roughly clear about what you want to purchase. Even in Amazon, when you have your products, right, you need to pay to list your products. So there is a Amazon listing process. It's called an A9 algorithm. If you Google A9 Amazon algorithm, you'll get to know. When you search for, let's say, a cooker grinder or a mixie in Amazon, right, the way it shows its ads is dependent on 5 to 6 different metrics at least, which includes the number of reviews, the sales velocity, and so on. So even Amazon product listing fees is also programmatic in nature. So we spoke about Quora. Quora has a particular purpose. When we have to get answers or when we need to answer others' questions, we go to Quora. When we need to interact with others from a personal nature, there are so many other platforms that you have. You have medium.com, you have facebook.com, and so on. So every platform has a purpose. So your campaign might have an objective. Let's say you get into an organization like Procter & Gamble. Over there, if you need to sell Tide, there are 3 to 4 ways where you sell Tide, right? Either you launch a new sub product within Tide, so that goes through a new product launch campaign where you need to decide how do you most utilize the limited budget to launch Tide, or you might have a campaign to increase the volume or increase awareness of Tide so that there is a brand recall. Or third, you might have to inculcate a volume search in Tide for a particular objective. So you'll have trade promotions as well as on-air promotions or end user promotions as well. Now, for these purposes, right? Let's say Tide trade promotions. Specifically, when you talk about trade promotions and on-air promotions, you need to decide on what should be the right amount to spend. Where should I promote my products as well? Now, we just discussed about programmatic, the platform of choice, as well as the channel of choice, mobile or web as well. But how do you connect the dots? Connecting the dots requires us to understand the story behind each of the channels, the purpose of each of the channels. Pinterest is more or less a discovery platform. Twitter is more or less a relay platform. Facebook is more or less an interaction platform. Instagram is more or less an interaction platform, but also an influencing or an influencer platform as well. LinkedIn is more of a business platform. So all of these they have a particular purpose associated, and they have metrics associated with respect to what is the right time of the day that is the best time to advertise your products as well. So for you to go through this mammoth amount of decisions, there is analytics in place. So when you're a marketing manager, when you're given an objective and the objective needs to be met clearly, you need to make all of these choices. And without analytics, if you go the standard route of just giving out advertising budgets to a media management platform, potentially the incremental value that you create will be lesser and lesser as such, and you'll end up in a spot where a software tells you that probably your ROI is low, probably you're not performing well, and you have two paths to go from there. Either you fight the analytics system saying that this does not consider a lot of competitive factors, probably the competitors are discounting, hence it's not measuring me right. Or you can get into the collaborative area where generally in newer organizations, right, there's either a chief data officer or a chief strategy officer who generally comes from an analytics origin, and they set up strategies for measurement of all the activities that you do, and you can collaborate in order to improve the effectiveness of the measurement platform. I'll walk you through a couple of measurement platforms. All of the marketing activities right now are traceable and are measurable. So be it your OOH advertising as well. Nowadays, it is easier for us to measure the impact of it. You might think, right? So let's take a generic advertisement. Coca-Cola spends a lot in multiple media platforms at a single time. Let's say you have a TV advertisement, a Facebook advertisement, as well as a banner advertisement or OOH, out of home. Now, if there is a spike in sales, how do you attribute the spike in sales to these individual channels? Traditionally, you can't do it, but using analytics, right? When you have historic data for, let's say, 1 year, 2 years, slowly statistically, we are able to say that 5% of the spike in sales came from the marketing budgets, not from the product velocity. Out of the 5%, 2% came from your social media, 1% came from your out of home, and the rest came from TV as a platform. And that is the level of measurement that we can do using market mix modeling as well as attribution modeling. And with very great accuracy, we can do this using analytics. Now, some of the key analytics projects that are being implemented in a lot of organizations. Number one is market mix modeling. You might have heard of this. And this is being, for the past 10 years, this is being refined more and more. So the capability of market mix modeling has increased a lot. What is market mix modeling? Market mix modeling segregates. So the objective is to identify the impact of every dollar spent across each channel for each campaign that you have to analytics. So if you think of $100 revenue or 1 lakh revenue, let's say, that you get from your product, some of them might come from just the traditional brand value. We call it inertia, product inertia, right? Even without analytics, or sorry, even without marketing, your products would sell. And there is a seasonality that has a factor as well. In winter, Coca-Cola would not sell as much as it sells in summer. So attributing to seasonality, we can identify what is the normal inertia. How much can the product sell even without marketing? That goes away as a baseline sales. The second component that is measured by market mix model is the product performance. Product performance comes into picture whenever there is an asset that is required to perform, such as a car or a mutual fund and so on. When you sell products like that, right, the acceleration of the product does not just depend on the historic brand value, but also the recent product performance. So the market mix model also calculates that. When you calculate the fuel efficiency, the safety ratings and all, what is expected out of the product performance by itself, not marketing, product performance by itself, right? And it negates that from the revenue that you get. What is left is market and marketing factors. What do I mean by market and marketing factors? Market factors are market by default. There's a randomness to the market. As soon as there is a corona that is hit, right, the market factor takes away some of the sales. For example, when our market crashes, mutual fund sales will go away. Even with the $1 million of advertising, people are not going to purchase your mutual fund, mainly because market by itself has a inertia that drives consumer behavior. So if I remove the seasonality, baseline sales, product inertia, product performance, and market factors, what is left is marketing factors. So this is your ROI that is measured by market mix models. So every organization will ask you to have a positive ROI. If I spend $1 in marketing, I want more than $1 in terms of the value that incremental sales that it brings. And this marketing factor has a particular objective associated, right? You can bring in money through increased awareness. You can bring in money through a promotion as such, or you can bring in money through not a consumer promotion, but a trade promotion. So there's a difference between the two. You can Google that as well. So even the difference between the impact of trade promotions to consumer promotions to your awareness campaigns across the sales funnel can be measured. So the outcome of market mix model is to tell you the proportion of sales that comes through, truly through marketing, and across marketing, what is the return on every dollar that you spend in each platform, be it social media or out of home or any other media. It can be word of mouth as well. Sometimes you need to pay for word of mouth. So influencer analytics is what we call it. So that can be measured. So read up a bit on market mix modeling. That is one way to strengthen your understanding of how analytics is being integrated into marketing. Another interesting area is cannibalization. So a lot of marketers make this mistake. Let's say you're a marketing manager in Tide. Procter and Gamble will have multiple products, right? Tide is not the only laundry detergent. It also has Ariel, if I'm not wrong. So if you're the marketing manager, and if you have to create a spike in sales, and your boss says, I'll give you $1 million, get me about $3 million increase in sales, you can promote your products. But when you look at it from a Procter and Gamble lens, not from your Tide lens, what you can see is, if you promote only Tide but not the other products in the portfolio of Procter and Gamble, you might end up moving demand from your P&G portfolio within itself, right? What's the point in moving customers from another brand umbrella company, let's say Ariel to Tide? What's the point? So more and more analytics is centralized, which means if you are a brand manager in Tide, the analytics will be owned by P&G. So P&G will measure your contribution. So measuring cannibalization, more or less, in simple words, if I have to explain cannibalization, right? Then, whenever there is a new product launch or a marketing campaign that you run, it might result in either growing the category, or eating into the market share of your competitors, or eating into the market share of your other portfolio products. The latter, the third part, is a cannibalization, and it's undesirable in most cases. In some cases, it is desirable. If you look at Maruti, they do embrace cannibalization. So you can read up on that. So cannibalization is something that is enabled by analytics. So your effort in terms of bringing value to the organization can be measured through the cannibalization analysis. So that's another thing that you can read up on. The next part is price corridor analysis. This is a very interesting problem statement. Let's say I have a category, um, and I have about 50 different products in the category. Even if I take an example of, let's say, insect repellents, right? You have mosquito mats, mosquito coils, mosquito liquids. You also have microwavable teddy bears where, which are mosquito repellent in nature. So across a price band, imagine that this is a chart that shows the volume sales versus the price across the entire category, not just your portfolio. So your demand curve might look like this, which is for particular band of price, right? There's a peak volume that is being sold. And in marketing terms, they call it a sweet spot, a price sweet spot. So in a given category, right, there might be multiple price sweet spots, because consumer behavior would be different. I might be a person who's very comfortable with mosquito mats, not mosquito coils, right? And I would want to pay a limited amount for that. So my ability to pay would be different based on my economic considerations. And because there are billions of us, You need to study the aggregate behavior of price versus volume. Now, what does this chart show you? From an analytics lens, it shows a lot, which means that there are areas where there is less demand. There's a drop in demand, right? Which means either of there are not enough products that fulfill any demand over here. There might be a sweet spot which is not identified, or it can also mean that the products over here are disruptible, which is it is not good enough for a person to go from this point to this point or this height to this point. I hope you are able to see my cursor, right? Okay. So uh, any product that comes in over here is a candidate for disruption, market disruption. And if you release a new product over here, it can do either of two things. It can bring in new customers who did not have a need earlier, but because of the value proposition at this point, they came in, or it can consume demand from this peak or this peak into this. So when OnePlus launched their phones as well, right? So for the price range of OnePlus phone, there was not a lot of volume. So it grabbed volume from low end phone category as well as high end phone category. So it cuts peaks. And this is where you can anticipate disruption. So if you are researching for new product development and the right price point, a price corridor analysis can help you. And for you to monitor your competitors as well, when you add the price to volume or the price profile over here with the change in number of products, right? Any change. So let's say you compare this chart month on month. So this is across price versus volume. When you overlay another month's chart, if there is a volume spike over here, and if there are new products that are launched here, then you know that there is something happening over here. Now, this is where analytics helps you in pattern identification or pattern detection. So it is almost impossible to keep an eye on all the social media, eye on all the new products that are launched, and all the noise in terms of the price points, the distribution that you have with your products and all. When you have a business impacting chart like this, it is very easy to identify whether am I being disrupted, am I finding an opportunity. I'll give you another example. So one of the areas where marketing team has its strength is identifying unmet needs of end consumers, right? So you tie up with the market research organization. Let me give you an example. If I'm a let's say beverage manufacturer, I manufacture coffees. If I have to launch new products in a new geography, let's say Central Africa, I need to identify how do I customize my beverages in order to launch my products in Central Africa region. So you'll tie along with market research organization and say that, okay, my strength is probably in the area of health drinks. Tell me what are the health drink trends in Central Africa. This is actually a bias study because you're actually creating a project brief for the market research agents, and your product brief will have to be narrowed down because you'll have budgetary constraints, and because you have narrowed down the brief, you'll get the market research that validates your own hypothesis. And that's not a good thing to happen. You need to have a neutral approach to identifying unmet customer needs. Now, where analytics comes into the picture is that you can identify, okay, before I go there, consumer conversations are captured in the internet more now than ever. If you look at, even if you want to do any research on dishwasher liquids, there are so many forums where people discuss newer recipes. Okay, add lime plus lime soda plus 3 to 4 different elements plus soda ash in order to create a new product. So there are homemade recipes that are being discussed. And when you scroll the number of articles, it's more than 1 million for even a category like dishwasher bar. Imagine how many conversations would happen for beverages as such. It can be health beverages, and it doesn't matter. Analytics has the power to crawl millions and millions and millions of articles, segregate regional articles, let's say articles are relevant to Central Africa, and then categorize the information into value propositions, utility, how are the consumers using newer recipes, newer beverages, and so on. And then ingredients, are there interesting ingredients that the customers are looking more and more towards? For example, during Corona times, right, turmeric was a top ingredients for air fresheners. You would never imagine that. And there were a couple of projects where interesting things came into picture, for even for air fresheners, right? Some of the innovation areas that were coming up were microwavable teddy bears. Now, if you put a research organization into the place, you'll never get an answer like this. But then why should you trust analytics? Mainly because there's a validation that can be done through analytics as well. Analytics can identify certain utilities. So microwave, teddy bear, interesting combination. It can then crawl Amazon and look at all products that are microwavable teddy bears, and then look at the sales rank to say that whether there's a validation, is there an increase in sales rank as well. So there is an increase in conversational velocity. There's an increase in sales or sales rank, which validates the conversational velocity. And then you can prioritize and say, this is a area where you need to invest. So identification of innovation areas is also an area where analytics can help you guys as well. So the reason I'm telling you these elements or conversation elements is that either you can embrace it or you can fight it. And I've seen a lot of fights. So when I was a management consultant earlier, the sales teams where we had an engagement, right, would actually fight, saying that how can a mathematical algorithm or a technology thing outrank my MBA studies and my work experience? So there are still a lot of people who rely on their gut instincts to make decisions, when you can utilize data and validated data to guide your direction as well. So you might have, as a business leader, you might have an hypothesis saying that probably I need to push more health drinks in this particular category within the value range of X. Why don't you utilize analytics to validate it? And of course, about 20 to 30% of analytics that is done is not done well in the first place as well. So you need to be aware so that it doesn't go against you. So you need to know when analytics goes against you and when can you collaborate with analytics in order to refine it further. For that, you need to improve your analytical maturity, which in turn will help you improve your career as well. So these are some of the examples that I've given, right? Which is market mix modeling, cannibalization analysis, price corridor analysis, and innovation discovery. 4, there are hundreds more. But this might be an interesting start for you to start the journey of understanding analytics and how analytics is shaping the field of marketing and branding. So while I want to cover more, I want to start here and start a conversation to hear you out. Does this make sense to you? And what questions do you have?
So whoever has questions, I would request you to please raise hands and then we can follow the order accordingly. Yes, Suvansh, you can go ahead. You can unmute yourself and.
Good evening, sir. So I was listening to this conversation on how analytics can be used to measure the data and the amount of data which we have, because the data, as you just mentioned, is so huge that it is practically impossible for a person to, analyze all the data. So we use several software. So, but sir, my question is, there are several cases in which we see that there are some biased data because the feedback which we receive is in some cases depends on several biases. So how can we use analytics to remove those biases while analyzing those data?
Okay, I'll answer that question. One small question back to you to understand where you're coming from. Could you name a couple of biases that you have in mind so that I understand what?
Okay, yes, sir. So let's say, for example, if I'm planning to launch a new soft drink in the market, And if I do a customer research, and so the thing is, because people are consuming soft drink brands like Pepsi and Coca-Cola from a very long period of time, they have a sense of, attachment towards the brand. So even if I launch a product which is better than them, and even if I offer a product which is, sometimes better than the product of Pepsi and Coca-Cola, and say and receive their feedback, they will be, so much attached to the brand that they will say, yeah, it's a good one, but Pepsi and Coca-Cola is better. So while collecting that data, you can have these kind of biases towards the brand itself because of the emotional attachment which you feel towards the brand. So how can we, remove those biases while analyzing those data?
Cool. So you might have heard of the new Coke debacle, right? That happened in the 80s. So Coke actually wanted to release a new drink in the 80s. They called it a new Coke, and they did a double-blind experiment to uh, test the consumer reception to the new Coke. So everyone who tasted the new Coke compared it to the old Coke without knowing which brand it is, right?
Mhm.
So everyone liked the flavor more than the old Coke, the texture more than the old Coke, and in every parameter, the new Coke was better. But then when Coke launched the new Coke, it was a major flop, mainly because people rebelled against what they believed in. Correct. So we need to understand where pure data-driven analysis might not make much sense. Correct. So when you're launching a new product, uh, you need to understand, why am I launching a new product in the first place? What Coke was trying to do was, it was trying to replace an old product. Now this is where the consumer perception has to be read, not just the parameters such as taste, flavor, quality, and all. You can't do data-driven analysis when the decision that a consumer takes is a hard-driven decision. So you need to tie up analytics with the objective. Now I'll tell you where data makes more sense. For example, if a company like take a random company which might want to launch a new product in India.
Mhm. Let's say PNG.
PNG,
PNG.
right?
Mhm.
So if PNG wants to launch a new product, so what is a product that is new to India which they have in their portfolio?
Can't think of one
Right.
at the moment.
Okay, so let's say they want to launch a product which is an air freshener, which is an IoT based air freshener. So they have those products in the US as well. IoT based air freshener in India. Now, when they launch a new product in India, you're not replacing anything, right? You're trying to increase the awareness of a new category. So again, you're playing into this game. So wherein for a given price point, there might be absolutely no demand. So over there, the analysis that you need to do is, if I have to take this decision, what should be the analytical steps that I need to follow in order to validate my hypothesis? For you to validate your hypothesis, you'll get a couple of analytics approach, which is price corridor analysis, as well as perception based analysis. And you can also do an innovation discovery and conversational analysis to check whether people are even talking about automatic air fresheners in India as well. Right, so you can validate your hypothesis over there. But it's very important to segregate hard-based decisions as well as your product introductions that does not replace anything, but which tries to disrupt the market. I'm not sure if I've answered your question,
No, sir,
Shivang.
you have answered it. Thank you. You have answered it.
All right, thanks. All right.
Um, Chirag, you can go ahead with your question.
Good evening, sir. So a while back, you were talking about gut instincts at times taking precedence over analytics. So my question is that even outside the corporate world, outside the brand area, we see in sports, music, analytics is used. But even then, people go ahead with that guts and instinct while on the field or while in the recording room. So my question is, this gut or instinct is on the basis of experiences which they might have in the past. So is there a way that whatever they are saying, that might not be quantitative in nature, but that can be integrated with the analytics already in hand through different methods which you have mentioned? Or what is the approach at that moment by a brand or by the person in contention over here?
Okay, good question, Chirag. Now I have an interesting view over here. So analytics is a science, which means that it cannot answer all the questions, but it is a field which is work in progress. Eventually, analytics will be able to solve a lot more problems than it can today. And because it can't answer all the questions, marketing is a field where people want certainty, right? From a management point of view. If your boss asked you to, get 3 million in revenue with 1 million investment, you would you'll go to the analytics team and ask them, give me concrete reasons or give me concrete answers. Concrete answers might not be available at that point in time. I'll give you a couple of examples over there. So let's say for you to have a visual banner, you're launching a new product or you're changing a logo of your company, and you want to create different banners and put it across multiple media, right? You want to have a out of home banner and a website banner and so on. Now there are many visual options that you can choose from. A happy family with a new banner, with a new logo, or it can be a competitive arena where two people are boxing and then you have your new logo because you're fighting your way into the new world. So there are multiple options. Now analytics is now in an area where, given an image, correct, it can decrypt what are the sentiments behind the image. So is it around anger? Different color combinations will express, or it will it will prick a couple of emotions, right? For example, the color orange, that is more energetic in nature. So analytics can identify different segments of emotions that every image can entice you towards. But then it can do that, but then it cannot effectively attach it to a purpose right now. As of now, I can be wrong, but then as of now, I don't think that it can answer that question. But it's work in progress. Once you embrace it, then you can automate your marketing team as well, so that in the future you can feed in 10 to 15 different images for your campaign, and the analytics algorithm will tell you which has the highest probability of conversion. You can take the top 3 and then make a gut-based decision. So your gut will still help you, but then analytics will help you simplify that decision. Instead of 100 options, it will bring it down to 3-4 options. Apply your gut based on the prioritization that it gives.
So it's more of a feedback sort of system where we keep feeding in data to improve it for future, and at the same time we narrow down the options and select based on our experiences and gut instinct up to a point where maybe in the future it can provide us a singular decision which is foolproof.
Right. So in other words, right, when I started, I said, right, analytics is an enabler. So it enables you to simplify your work. So if you're the head of marketing or chief marketing officer, right, the business would ask you that, you need to either decrease your costs or increase your efficiency, correct? Which means that there are certain processes that are extremely manual. For example, interacting with media houses and all, they are extremely manual. Why don't you cut down some of the process efforts? There are certain processes such as creatives, prioritizing creatives, standardizing creatives and all. Why don't you cut down? So analytics will help you all over there to identify where can I cut down. And in terms of being effective, it will help you cut down on time, so that all the people who work for you can yield double the results compared to what it is right now. So it is always an enabler. It will help you measure better as well. So you need to identify how to use analytics, not fight analytics.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, Chirag.
Rusian, you can go ahead with your question.
Thanks. So good evening, sir. My question was based on the on cannibalization. So in cannibalization, especially in smartphone industry, wherein we see a new phone launched every 3 months or so. So what are the parameters that are used in this particular smartphone industry, wherein see cannibalization has to be important because they have to loosen out on their market share of their previous product, and then they come up with their new product. So what are the parameters used in this short period of time? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. That's a good question. So unfortunately, it's not cannibalization. It's a price corridor problem. So see, earlier smartphone decisions were very easy, right? You had 3 to 4 categories: a low-end feature phone, a low-end smartphone, mid-end, and high-end. Correct. So the categories were lesser. Now you have so many categories. Now the price range actually dictates categories. So below 5,000, 5 to 10,000, 10 to 12,000, 12 to 15,000, 15 to 20,000, 20 to 25,000. All these are categories. Now smartphone is so is so broken up that there are about 50 different price corridors that act as segments. Now, because of that, right? If you look at the chart of sales of smartphones, it is actually very closer to a straight line. It's more or less an inverted curve like this, right? It's an inverted curve and much less left to disruption. So if you look back at what happened post 2007, 2007 was when Apple launched iPhone, right?
Yeah.
That is when the entire phone ecosystem was under threat of domination by Apple, right? It was such a strong move. And there was only one player that actually took the charge very well, which was Samsung. So Samsung actually, if not for Samsung, Android would have been in trouble. And if not for Android, Samsung would have been in trouble. What Samsung did was it took a data based approach. They launched about 30, 35 different models at every price point in 2008, 2009, and then analyzed what stuck and what did not stick, which form factor, which price point, what combination of form factor, price point and features worked well, and so on. And they continually do that. Even today, they're doing a price corridor based innovation discovery to identify at which price point, what is the best feature set that the end audience will appreciate. So if you want to Google about this a bit more, right? This has a term associated with it, which is, what's it called? It starts with C actually. I'll send you the link as well. So uh, within research as well, right? There's a field wherein you make a list of all features and make a product. When I say make a product, make a product combination and say that if I offer you these product combinations at this price, would you buy it or not? So there is a conjoint analysis. Now I got it. This is called a conjoint analysis. So using conjoint analysis, you can identify the right combination of features for a given price point that has the largest impression that is created or an intent to purchase. Okay, so you can utilize price corridor plus conjoint in order to make decisions better.
Thank you so much, sir.
Alright.
Sachi, you can go ahead with your question.
Good evening, sir. I have actually 2 questions. My
Mhm.
first question is, how can we use marketing analytics to tap into markets which lack in data in general? And the second question is, how big of an influx in data did we see that drove up analytics due to the COVID pandemic? Because so many people were going online, and how much did that affect the analytics? Did the probability get sorry, not the probability, but did the insights get sort of changed a lot, or did you get newer insights, something like that?
Okay. All right. So the first part of the question is with respect to geographies or even locations where the data availability is lower, right? So over there, the best thing that you as a marketer can do is enable or encourage other organizations that gather information. For example, Kantar, Quantium, Nielsen, these are companies that actually create data, right? So Nielsen actually does a panel data gathering to gather data with respect to all brands across all departments. So generally, you'll have Nielsen data for all locations. Now, what data would you be missing? The data you would be missing specifically, when I take India as an example, right? A large proportion of sales happen in non-organized retail chains. So if you encourage a company that builds data out of Kirana stores and all, there are a couple of organizations that are trying to do that, which is they create a panel of Kirana stores and then try to extrapolate that information to create data about rural consumption, suburban consumption, unorganized sector consumption, and so on. So there are startups that are coming up in every geography. So you as marketing professionals can either fight that and say I'll take gut-based decisions, or encourage these companies, utilize them. You need to do the best you can with the data that you have, and over a period of time it will be data rich. The world will be data rich. All right, but you are relying on organizations that are startups. You are relying on organizations that will one day propel you into the future in those geographies. But there is always something that you can do in order to push that goal right now, so that it will be fruitful 2-3 years from now. The second part is around Corona and the impact, right? So I've been through two almost recessions. One is in 2008, the other one is in 2020. The story about analytics is that as soon as there's a recession, analytics demand is off the sky. Off the sky. So even Quantzig, right, the demand doubled. Why? Why does that happen? Because analytics can help any given business problem, such as, let's say, supply chain, manufacturing, marketing, and so on. Whenever there is a difficulty for a business, it needs to tighten its bolts, right? It needs to improve its profitability. It needs to decrease its costs. So if you have a business function like supply chain, there is always a better way to do your warehousing, do your product distribution, and so on. If you are into marketing, there's always a better way to discover innovation, to optimize your marketing spend, and so on. So there's always an increase in analytics spend whenever there is a scenario like we have in Corona. And there, of course, there'll be a lot of new insights that have come in, like the microwavable teddy bear that I told you, right? Plus, it also identifies what are the prominent marketing messages that you need to provide. For example, for one of our clients, right? They had hand wash products and all from a long period of time, but we identified that products that highlighted your alcohol content, that saw an absolute increase in its sales rank, but our client was not doing that. So which means that there is an opportunity for them to accelerate their sales if they actually do this messaging a lot better. So now analytics is helping you not just identify the right channels, but also the message that you need to provide to accelerate your sales.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Yeah, Ruchita, you can go ahead with your question.
Hello, sir. So my question was about this header bidding method used in programmatic advertising. So the first thing is that it's so automated, and for everything you have a demand side and a supply side platform where you cannot ensure what kind of users are they actually converting or not. So I'm actually talking about the arbitrage sites and everything that you see on all these publisher sites. So as a brand, when you're analyzing, okay, how much cost has gone into some advertising that we have done, so how do you exclude those arbitrage traffic, because they don't actually convert for you? They are just traffic, like it could be any for site or something like that. So how do you cut that cost out of it, or how does it work that way?
All right. So statistics is very good at identifying arbitrage and random variation. So the purpose of statistics and statistical inferential analysis. So there are only two ways to measure. All right. One is deterministic, when you have a mathematical connection, right? 100 units of sales, 100 units of sales comes from 30% increase in price versus volume and so on. That's a deterministic way. Inferential way is where you have a smaller sample or a disconnected data where you're trying to infer the connection. So what statistics does in the first step is to break down the data in terms of random variation, trend, seasonality, and an unmeasured impact, right? So statistics can also say that there is an impact, but I don't know where to attribute it yet. So that is stage one. So random variations are already taken out. What random variation tells you is that it reflects the human randomness in human consumption, right? So you know that in a year you'll spend about, let's say, 10,000 in grocery. I'm just giving an example. Let's say in a quarter, you'll purchase 10,000 rupees. This has more confidence to it than when you say you'll spend about 1,000 rupees next week. That might not be guaranteed. That is more random in nature. You might not, right? So statistics tells you that if there is a variation in demand, some of them will be just because the variation makes sense at a longer time frame than a shorter time frame. So the time frame will be considered over there, removed from the equation, and then the rest of it will be measured.
Okay, so if let's say if in a New York Times site we go down and we see those paid ads by like native ads and everything by Outbrain or Taboola, and people click on it, so they are directed to an arbitrage site, and then let's say there are these phone ads. So the arbitrage site just talks about something, and then there are these top 3 phone ads: Apple, Samsung, and one more. So and people do click on that if they are looking to buy an iPhone, let's say. So but iPhone pays for that, but the traffic is not, like the TQ is not ensured that it's going to convert later or not. So I was
Correct.
asking about that.
Got it. So there are bigger problems than that as well, and that's not related to statistics or analytics, but technology in general. So if you have heard of malicious clickbait, so there was an incident called Bahama botnet, and there are a lot of hijack activities or hijack bots um, that will actually hijack the references. For example, you might install a toolbar on your browser or any software that will hijack a small part of your browser. All it does is that whenever you click on any link, right, it will redirect to 10 different products and then go to a particular Amazon page and whichever link that you click. So the destination is the same, whatever you wanted to click from the source, but it will be redirected to 10 different places. It makes measurement a bit more complicated, but analytics will not be able to solve this a lot, but technology, security and technology solutions should be able to solve this problem. Specifically your technology service providers, like Kaspersky, ESET, Norton, and all that, they will help. The second part is when it comes to random clickbait, non-conversion and all, we need to understand the purpose behind it, right? So your analytics outcome will tell you that there is randomness about 5% or 4%, which is randomness, non-conversion, and so on. Now you need to look at the magnitude. If it is large, then there is a definite malicious problem that you have. Right. If it is a very small amount, 2%, 4%, I'm not very sure if it makes sense for you to analyze it a lot. The right question at that point in time is to say that, how do I remove this 4% and make it 0? So probably your programmatic, I'll tell you 2 to 3 reasons why this might be happening. Your programmatic investment, correct? So programmatic investment is a probability game, which means that randomly, in other words, right, you'll have, let's say, $1,000 of budget. You need to allocate that budget in 3 to 4 different ad distribution networks. Let's say Google Ads. Google Ads is an ad distribution network. Now it will tell you that there are 20 different, so either you can pay a lot, there'll be a lot less visuals, but then the right audience might be in front of you. Or you can choose much cheaper slots, let's say middle of the night, to people in Kazakhstan, probably. Again, the conversion rate will be lower over there. You can still invest $1,000. The conversion, it will be extremely cheap. It will be in 10 cents. So you can buy about 1 million impressions for the same $1,000. So you might make that decision to buy those ad slots. Your conversion rate will be lower because the probability of conversion is also lower, and that will come in as a randomness that you tell. So the way to identify that is to look at the channel ROIs. For every channel, what is the ROI that I'm getting? Identify the top 10 channels that has the least ROI, and then identify what are the time slots where your ads were aired. Then you'll naturally get an answer. Probably it was a mistake in terms of the allocation of budget. So
And
either it
so,
can be a
yeah.
technology problem or a allocation problem.
And last question for that. So when you said that the traffic eventually lands on your own landing page where you want them to come from any source, whichever it might come, even an arbitrage site. So how ethical, I mean, it is not too, it is controversial, but it is still legal. But then how ethical is it to get the traffic from all these sites, even if it's 4%? Should you let it come, because at the end they are still landing on your page only?
Whether that traffic converts or not, that's a question. So see, in the end, you being the marketing manager, you're responsible. So ethics does not play a role. You're bringing a client through a distribution network, right? Now, depending on the type of websites that you advertise in, right? There are repercussions, which is the branding angle to it, right? If your organization is brand oriented, then you'd have a whitelist of the type of companies or the what do you call line beyond which you will not cross. There are multiple tools for you to identify that line. If you go to alexa.com, not your Amazon Alexa, of course, Alexa PageRank was a decade old technology, and it is bought by Amazon. And what Alexa does, if you go to Alexa PageRank, right? For every website, it will give you the worldwide ranking in terms of where does that website stand. Is it in top 10? How reliable is it? What is the monthly customer count? And what is the reliability rating across multiple security firms and all? You can set a bar over there. So again, this is more of a strategic decision. Tactically, you just rotate money across the shortlisted websites. Now, if you are going blind, if you say that, Google, you choose all the cheap ad slots for me, then you might be violating a couple of corporate laws. So there are hard barriers to it. It shouldn't be done that way.
Okay, sir, got it. Thank you.
Let me know if I have not answered any part of your question.
No, it's completely answered. So I understood the whitelisting part, that you should have a set whitelist ready before going openly in the header bidding.
Correct. So there are a lot more
I got
rules.
that.
For example, all the platforms where you advertise, right? You have a set of rules based on the brand, such as it should not propagate any hatred. It should not propagate any news around human violence and so on. So you follow those guidelines. So those will be, that will whitelist a good set of websites. And what you need to do is, given the limited set of websites, where do I allocate money? When do I allocate money? What should be my target audience? And how much should I allocate? That's what you need to do. And that is what analytics will help you.
Okay, sir. Got it. Thank you.
All right.
So there's the last question. Do we go ahead since it's
Yeah, sure,
okay,
sure.
yeah. So Tanishka, you can go ahead with your question.
Hello, sir. Sir, I'm little confused that in the graph, like how can a brand anticipate or predict market disruption after reaching some sweet point or peak point? We have the data of the like their highest value. Now, how can I like as a marketing manager, how can I predict the this down value of the product, because I have the peak value data with me? How can I like predict the disruption?
Are you talking about this price corridor thing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So understand it this way. Let me take this part of the curve. So let's say this is 10 rupees, this is 20 rupees, this is 30 rupees, this is 40 rupees. Okay. This is the volume or the demand at those prices. Okay. Now between 20 and 30 rupees, there are some products that are here. Now, why do you think that customers buy certain products for 20 rupees, 30 rupees, but for 25 rupees, they're not purchasing? Probably because the products that are available at 25, they are not as good as the 30 rupees products. And the incremental 5 rupees does not give them benefits that they want for the extra 5 rupees. Correct? So which means that in an ideal world, there should be a flat line. everyone should, it should cater to everyone. They should actually reflect the income distribution as well, in other words. But the reason it is not a flat line or a linear line, in other words, is because the value proposition over here is not so good, probably, right?
So how do
That
we
very
decide if the product of 25 rupees is not working? So why should I increase the price of the product to 30? How do I know that 30 will work and
no,
25
you won't.
as
So think of a product that is available at 25. If you increase the price to 30, it will not sell more. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to tell you is that the products that are available at this price point right now, they do not, they are not as good as 20 rupees and 30 rupees products in terms of their value proposition. Now, the only way to sell more is to decrease the price. Now you'll have a product which is slightly better than the 20 rupees product. So when you reduce the product price from 25 to 20, you're offering a discount. The customers will see that, yeah, this is probably a better value proposition for the products that are already existed in the 20 rupees price point. You'll move some demand from here and you'll eat into your market share of your competitors. But cutting down the price might not be the best decision for you. Probably improving the value proposition of that product is the right reaction, which means that add a couple of more features for the same price point. You might stabilize this particular dip. Correct. So, of course, absolutely, I'm not telling you that if you increase the price, the sales will skyrocket. That's against the principle of your price volume curve, right? Demand supply curve. That does not happen. What it shows is the current scenario. For the products that are in the market, there are some products that does not seem to have value propositions. There are some products which seem to meet the value proposition requirements for the clients. And wherever there's a dip, here is an opportunity for you to disrupt. It is all that it says.
thank you, sir.
All right.
So we have one last question from Sriram.
Abhikya, it doesn't, see, I have time, I am okay, as long as you guys are willing to increase your knowledge in the field of analytics. I can spend half an hour, 1 hour more. It doesn't matter. So feel free.
Right. Thank you. Sriram, you can go ahead with your question.
Thank you, sir. It was a very insightful session, especially the point about cannibalization and using it for advantage part. So my doubt was a bit more futuristic in sense, because so right now we see a lot of companies embracing data as their mode of helping them to make decisions, and data-based decision making is currently being embraced by a lot of companies, mostly because of the shift to online also. And thanks to the advancements in artificial intelligence or machine learning for that matter, the decision making process is also getting much more simpler. So as professionals who are getting into the market, so what would you say the human intervention would come at a future point, because all of it is being eased up by the technological advancement. So where do you think the human intervention lies in this case?
Okay, very good question. All right, now this is not true just for marketing. This is true for humanity, and we have this fear across all fields, right? Not just marketing. Let's take trading as well. Algorithmic trading will take away everyone's trading jobs. Your some of the highest paid jobs are management consulting, investment banking. So investment bankers will have no jobs in the future. Marketing folks will have no jobs in the future. So for us to alleviate this fear and try to rationalize this, you need to understand what separates us from pure technology. What is it that we can do which the technology can't? You tell me. Any ideas that you have?
Sir, our understanding of the human behavior or all the other aspects, softer skills that we have cannot be replaced, at least to a point. I mean, probably after a point when machine learning has that much of a database or they do that much of a reading onto it, it might be possible. But I think until that point, understanding the human behavior or being the empathetic self that we are is, I think, one of our core advantages, I feel.
Correct. So I'll just go back a couple of slides over here. So I said, right, psychology, business, and creativity are the core components of marketing. So humans are very good at creativity, and machines are not really good, at least yet in the areas of creativity, right? Psychology is not machine psychology that we are trying to talk about, right? It's human psychology again. In the world where we need to fear, the producers and consumers both are machines. If the consumer is a human, then there is randomness in the human behavior. There is a psychological change which is not predictable completely by an algorithm. So no algorithm in the world can predict day-to-day market activity. The best example that can kill any algorithm or any such thing is your market as well, right? Your share market. There's no algorithm in the world that can predict what's going to happen tomorrow. What is the values at which the market will interact? Because there's a lot of humans that buy and sell. Similarly, in the field of marketing as well, there is work that is purely labor oriented. For example, if you look at let's say the drivers industry and Ola cabs and all, right? So what does a driver do? It's not a knowledge work that they do, right? The drivers who drive cars, it's not a knowledge work, it's just a labor work, laborious work. It is repetitive, replicable, right? So AI will kill those jobs first. Jobs that requires psychology, creativity, it's very hard to kill. And that is where you need to add value more and more and more in areas where there is psychology plus creativity. As a marketing professional, you need to integrate these two. Once you have the power to integrate psychology, business, and creativity, and remove all the redundant processes that a business does not require, you're in a good place. And there's always a need. As long as there are human consumers, there are humans for you to convince. And what you're trying to do is convince humans to take your products rather than your competitors' products. It is a conversation. And we as humans do not like conversations with a machine. So if you call, let's say, HDFC Bank, and if you speak to an IVR, doesn't that boil your blood? So we are in a world where we want to talk to a human. Human-human interaction is undervalued. The strongest organization or institutions, or the set of strongest institutions in the world, are religious institutions that have weathered centuries, because they rely on conversations, they rely on stories. And as long as you understand that, and as long as your consumer is still a human, we can always play on our strengths, which is psychology, business plus creativity. Do a good job over there, remove all laborious processes, and we still have a conversation to fulfill.
Thank you so much. It puts a lot of things into perspective now. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Sriram.
Right.
Okay. What other questions do we have?
So, sir, we come to the end of the questions round. So, we come to the end of the session. We would like to sincerely thank you for taking the time out today and sharing your ideas and passing on the enlightenment to all of us. I'm sure all of us at MICA are going to take all that you said a long way, and we hope to continue a long-term association with you. I would also like to thank both the batches for being a part of this session and participating actively and making the session more interactive. So until next time, be safe, take care, and we'll see you in the next MLS session very soon. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
It was wonderful
Thank you, sir.
interacting with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Very
sir.
much.